Hi, and welcome to the audio section. So I plan to take you through the first part of the audio slides, and then I'm going to pass it over to Brooke, so she'll conclude this section for us. The main point we want to drive home is that audio is alive and well. During the pandemic, listenership did take a hit, audio consumption changed, but we can see now that digital and terrestrial radio have bounced back from last year's lockdown. Streaming and podcast listening continue to increase. And while this has been an upward trend for the last few years, the pandemic definitely catapulted these categories and contributed to the mainstream adoption. Another key theme is that terrestrial radio still dominates the medium. It's important to note, since AM/FM radio has developed somewhat of the reputation as the dinosaur in audio landscape, and while other categories are very much growing, terrestrial radio is still a large part of the audio world. So we thought it important to begin our conversation with this slide and stress that radio remains the top reach medium. From the chart, you can see that radio reaches about 89% of persons 18 plus weekly, while radio reaches slightly down from the prior year, about 3% year over year. It still surpasses all other media. Now, I do want to call attention to the smartphone and TV categories, as they're not far behind and they are catching up. So this is something to watch and something we will watch, since the difference between these two categories compared to radio isn't as noticeable as past years. So as media consumption evolves, so will the categories and then their opportunities to reach consumers. It isn't surprising that radio took a hit last year during the lockdown, but it is rebounding. This chart is based on the weekly cum of 45 ppm markets from March through December of 2020. And we can see radio's weekly reach return to about 97% of March levels by Q4 of 2020, which is labeled as fall and winter. Day parts, if we want to just take a look at day parts individually, AM drive was hit hardest during the lockdown. However, by Q4, they were back to about 88% of March levels. And while midday isn't noted on here, it should be that midday's listener numbers increased during the lockdown and listening habits shifted. And so far, from what we can tell, it seems that they are holding on to those listeners. So this chart shows in-home listening versus out-of-home listening across 2020. Now, while in-home listening, which is the light blue, did spike during the lockdown, it rose about 31% over March, and out-of-home dropped off during the same quarter. As the year progressed, we can see that listening habits more closely resemble March of 2020. So nearly 70% of radio listening is done out of the home by fourth quarter. So as a country, with regard to listening, where we are now hasn't changed much since March of 2020. We do recognize, though, that there are certain markets or areas that may differ. We're aware that there can be individual market nuances, so we would adjust radio plans and buys accordingly. But as a rule of thumb, people are still consuming radio at a larger percentage outside of the home. And of those working, 56% are commuting to work daily. We wanted to take a deeper dive into time spent listening using share of ear information. So you can see that the audio is broken out into listening segments. Against adults 18 plus, AM/FM radio dominates time spent listening with 43% share. This is huge. It tells the story that AM/FM radio is doing well. If we move over to the light blue section to Pandora and Spotify, at first glance, we see that Spotify has a slight advantage over Pandora, but Pandora is still our choice vendor because we look at ad-supported subscribers. Pandora's audience is around 98% ad-supported, which means they're consuming these ads as they listen, where Spotify's ad-supported audience is only around 65%, so that's a pretty significant difference. Pandora has also acquired a number of other vendors within the last few years, such as SoundCloud, Stitcher, so they're growing their reach through acquisitions as well. I'd like to jump over to the gray section, look at owned music. Owned music, we would define that as CDs, records, MP3s, and as streaming audio reach grows, it's actually growing at the expense of owned music, not AM/FM radio, which many of us may think is happening. So owned music here is at 9%, where a year ago it was at 12% of the time spent listening. So that's about a 25% decrease year over year, and that's pretty significant. And then lastly, for this slide, I just want to note podcasting. Their share is up year over year. It's about 50%, so it was 4% previously, 6% now. So we see podcast time spent listening is definitely growing. So here, streaming growth is broken out into a little bit more detail. Although AM/FM radio remains consistent, we can see that here. Streaming continues to grow on a larger scale. There are two sections highlighted with green boxes. It's streaming audio by smartphone and then streaming audio by tablet. If we look at the streaming audio via smartphone, it's up about 28% year over year, and streaming via tablet is 20%. And we do not anticipate this growth slowing anytime soon. So as a company, we're making concerted efforts to continue to consider digital and include digital as part of our audio campaigns, given these statistics and the growing reach. So time spent with digital audio is also on the rise. Many thought that the loss of commuting time during the pandemic would impact the platform's growth, but we see that basically listeners just adjusted their behaviors. If we look at the chart, it's divided up into year. So we see 18 to 19, then 19 to 20. The time spent listening increase is pretty substantial. So then we get to 2020 and beyond, and it doesn't seem to increase as dramatically as previous years. And while this is the case, the key point here, this takeaway should be that digital audio reach increases, which is what we saw on the previous slide. So we have this larger pool of listeners, and then coupled with this slide, this larger pool is consuming digital audio for longer periods of time. So for 2021, digital audio is projected to account for 11.7% of total media time, and that's up about 5% year over year.
While streaming audio reach and time spent is increasing, we want you to know that it's not just due to entertainment purposes. Smart speaker adoption and the use has surged over the past year because it is a platform that gives users the ability to not only listen to music, but also search for information and products. Yes, 36% of all smart speaker audiences are listening to more music and entertainment, but also 26% reported making at least one purchase with voice commands during the past calendar year. In terms of smart speaker content consumption, many streaming giants like Pandora, Spotify, SoundCloud would be assumed to lead the time spent metrics. However, current data actually indicates that AM/FM content dominates time spent on smart speakers. This is likely due to audiences spending less time in the car and more time at home for both work and school. But as Donna mentioned previously, between the two streaming audio giants, we see that while Spotify might be winning the overall reach war, it is ad-supported content on Pandora, which offers our advertisers far greater reach, followed by podcasts. Podcast listenership growth is not just fueled by the youth, but increased engagement is happening across all key demographics. Time spent among adults 45 to 54, a key demographic for many of our clients, increased 116% over the past 2 years. Increased time spent among podcast listeners is important to note because they engage with AM/FM radio content half as much as the general population. There are a lot of streaming audio and podcast opportunities currently available, but if you'd like the flexibility to test a variety of placements, have tight budget constraints, complex target audiences, or niche markets to consider, investing programmatically may be the best buying option for you. In 2020, 16.5% of all digital audio ad spending was bought programmatically, making it a billion-dollar business. Next year, this percentage is expected to increase to 21%. Now, this is a trends presentation. So we wanted to acknowledge the newest channel creating buzz in our industry, and that's social audio. Clubhouse was the first to market in this space as they launched in April 2020 exclusively among iPhone users. Now, Clubhouse reaches 2 million active users weekly. While paid media opportunities have not been publicized, advertisers are certainly leading and engaging in conversations. Since Clubhouse's launch, Twitter released Twitter Spaces, which is available for both iPhone and Android users. as a forum to bring voices together. Facebook is said to be working on a similar offering. Now, details are limited in regards to what advertising opportunities will be available in this channel. However, we've included it today because we believe it's what's next in audio. As you consider your upcoming marketing efforts, keep in mind that audio listenership is growing across all channels and all devices. As a result, this group is allowing advertisers to engage in an all-speaker approach, and it's highly recommended for achieving scale. The opportunities for streaming and podcast have increased due to increases in time spent across all key demographics. The growing scale in streaming and emerging audio channels like podcasts and social audio underscores the fact that audio is still one of the top media channels for gaining reach and awareness. And I like to add, it can be very cost efficient too.